Hey everybody, Russell Gray, co-host of the Real Estate Guys radio show, here for another edition of Boots on the Ground. And today we're talking teak, wood, agriculture, offshore, with our correspondent and contributor from Panama, who I guess right now is sitting in Belize, Rachel
Yes.
Jensen. Hey, Rachel.
Hello, thank you for having me on. It's been very interesting times, as we know, over the last few months. And since we last did a Teak podcast, figured it'd make sense to get everybody updated with what's going on in the latest scoop.
Yeah, I mean, the whole concept with boots on the ground is, we all read the news and pay attention to what's going on in the financial world, and we look at the macro picture and we try to figure out how to position our portfolio to either capitalize on opportunity or mitigate risk. And obviously, there's no yield out there. Most asset classes are in complete bubbles and people are afraid. They feel like I've got to participate because if I sit in cash, I get nothing. But if I participate, then I could take a 50, 60% haircut and everything would have to double for me to get back to even. I was around back at the dot-com bust, when the NASDAQ went from 5,000 to 2,500. It was 17 years before it came back. And of course, it finally did. But if you happen to be 55, 60 years old at the time, it didn't end well for you. So one of the things that we like about Teak, and if people haven't heard the podcast episode that we did with you, Rachel, we'll put it in the show notes below and people can check that out. But we're really here to kind of talk about what is going on in the wide, wonderful world of agriculture and teak wood in particular, in the context of what's going on in the world overall. And obviously the big thing is the global shutdown. We've seen a big spike in lumber prices, kind of just general construction lumber, but what's happening with teak?
Well, the teak has been following a very similar sort of pattern. And, what we've seen, at least at our teak farms, is the teak is quite boring in a sense. It's just continuing to grow, which is what we've anticipated for it to do. But we have a management company who's there, takes care of everything. I'd say the one disadvantage that we have seen is that we were supposed to be doing a thinning for our older farm this year. We are putting that off until everything just reopened again in Panama, which is just starting now at this point. So that thinning is going to be a little delayed. But, at the end of the day, and we've covered this in the podcast, is that even if we let the trees continue to grow for a little bit longer, it just means they're literally growing in value because they're growing in size. So there's more board feet at the end of the day. So that's really been the most of in the extent of what we have seen. But there still continues to be that demand for teak. People are still building with it. They're still using it in construction. So that hasn't stopped. I mean, I think especially now with everything that's been going on these past 6-7 months, we've even seen more people utilizing teak because there's been more home improvement projects. There's been more time for people to work on those things that they've put off for such a long time. So teak has still been used and quite well over these past few months. But generally, prices are going up. We've seen that teak prices over years have steadily increased at about 5.5% per year. And this year it'll probably be a little bit higher than that as a result. But yeah, the one thing that we weren't able to do is one of the thinnings. But other than that, the teak is still growing and growing quite well.
So when it comes to the final market destination, I mean, you guys can really sell all over the world. It's extremely durable and it can be
Yes.
shipped anywhere. It can be stored. Are you finding any shifts in where it's going based on what's happening in the global economy?
Yeah, to some extent, what we've spent a lot of time doing as well is understanding how we would be able to keep the teak in country so that it cuts back on transportation costs and cuts back on even the length of the sale of getting the timber into somebody else's hands. And so what we're doing with the teak farms that we have is we're actually processing the logs to lumber. A lot of times when people are investing in teak, more specifically, but lumber or agriculture more generally, they cut down the logs and then they sell the logs. But there's much more and a higher profit margin when you process those logs to lumber. So there's a huge demand for the lumber, generally, and you tend to get a better return on your investment because you're able to sell it at a higher price. So,
Gotcha.
there's still the Asians still India and China are still the biggest consumers of it. They will continue to be the biggest consumers of it because it doesn't really matter what's going on in the world. People are still going to use it to be building, utilizing construction, boats, all of that. And I think even, over the past 6 months, I don't quote me on this because I don't have any hard research, but my uncle who's a boater was telling me that boat sales have gone up because what were people able to do? They were able to hop on their boat and go, run around the water for a little bit of time if they weren't able to hang out in public. So teak is used in a lot of boating as well, boats and high-end furniture. So that market has continued. But what we've really been focusing on is how are we able to keep this teak in house, or at least in country, in order to expedite that process for our investors and even for our internal team who profits at the end when the lumber is sold. And so we have the development side of the company as well. And so what ultimately will happen is teak hardwoods will sell the finished product to the development company, and they are two separate entities at the end of the day, but we'll sell to the development company and we'll be able to integrate them into the tiny home communities and into the different projects that are going on in both Panama and Nicaragua, which is where the farms are. So there's always a market. And I have to say the real estate market, at least for us, the international real estate market over the past 6-7 months has just been phenomenal. I think a lot of people are looking for a plan B. They want that bolt hole. They want something overseas so that they don't have everything in one country or one asset class. So it's been neat to see that from our perspective, as well as the timber industry is doing awesome. The international real estate market is doing awesome because people want options. I mean, regardless of what you think politically, regardless of what you think about the pandemic, there's a fear there. There really is a real fear, and one of the best ways to mitigate that is just to give yourself options.
Yeah, well, I mean, that's what happened to us after 2008. 2008 hit us, and we looked around, and we were already a little bit involved in Mexico, but that's how we ended up in Belize. We
Right.
wanted to have a legitimate business offshore. We wanted to have relationships with people. We wanted to have income. We wanted to have the ability to have some place to go where we weren't trying to figure life out. We'd already figured it out. And a funny thing happened when we were doing that. A whole lot of other people were doing it too. And of course, where we've chosen to be is in one of the more densely populated areas of a very sparsely populated country. And yet compared to, something like a New York or a San Francisco or even a lot of suburban areas, it's still pretty spread out. And right now, because of the COVID, I think a lot of people are looking for places to be where they're not all on top of each other. And I think the other thing too that was an appeal to us is that, you look at an environment where there may be a depression or an extended recession, and you wonder what life is going to be like around when you're in an environment where people can't make a living. And the one advantage of being in a kind of a third world country, if you will, not that Panama is third world, but certainly Belize, is that these folks are already poor, right? I mean, they're going to get up and they're going to, catch a fish and grab a papaya off a tree or coconut or whatever. I mean, it's not that simple, but fairly simple. There's not as much leverage in the system. So we looked at agriculture, and then we started following people that, talked about international strategies. And so you mentioned Panama, and I've been following Panama. Panama has been one of those countries that's had one of what I'd call the preferable passports. If you're going to get an alternative passport besides a U.S. passport, Panama's been on the short list. Pretty stable. There's a lot of nice things to say about Panama. But one of the things that came up with you, Rachel, is that acquiring this land in Panama with the teak on it also could yield a residency visa. And I've heard some rumors that may be changing. Can you bring us up to date on that?
So the visa that we have paired our program with is called the Friendly Nations Visa. And how it stands right now is there are 3 ways that you can obtain the visa. And one of them is with a land investment valued at $10,000 or more. So through the ownership of the teak parcel, granted, depending on which age, it's $10,000 or more, then you're able to apply for your Friendly Nations Visa. So this decree was back in 2012, and it was a decree. It was never written in as a law. So, we've always had this feeling that it could change. And it just depends on who was in office and what their primary motive was and how it could or would change. And so over the past 8 years, we've been chatting with clients like, well, if this is something you want to do, at least get started on the residency sooner rather than later. You can plan to start years from now, but we just don't know what that's going to look like. So there have been rumors that the decree is changing. The Friendly Nations Visa is changing. It hasn't been confirmed. We're not sure at what point they would be making these changes if they did. But for us, how it would affect us is that the land value would have to be significantly more. And I believe it's $150,000 or $200,000 invested in land in order to even qualify for the residency. So what we've seen, at least over these past couple of weeks, Panama reopened again October 12th. So what we've seen is the clients who were thinking about residency or planning on residency are jump starting to get ready, because once you're in process, then you're grandfathered in and you can continue the process. So, I mean, we've had clients left or right booking flights and making sure they had all the documents just to at least begin that residency process. And, you know, it could just be rumors. Maybe somebody just wanted it. Maybe an attorney wanted to spread this in order to get people started right away. I don't know, but we are continuing to monitor it, and you know, we haven't heard anything official at this point. It's possible, and it has been possible since the day that this decree has been issued in 2012, but there's no guarantee.
It's like toilet paper in a virus crisis, right? And you don't think about it until you need it. Then you go to the
Yeah.
store and there's none on the shelf. So if
Yes.
getting a residency visa in a friendly nation like Panama, and we could talk about all the reasons Panama is awesome, but we don't have time. Probably now's a good time to think about doing it, right? Because if that rumor turns out to be fact, there's going to be a lot of people who wish they would have stampeded through the gate when it was still open.
Yes, it's true. And I know one of our partner companies sent out an email about these proposed changes. And then my phone was just going, it's like, I started the process. I did this. Where am I here? I want to get started now. And because people understand, I mean, the importance of it. And I think mentally they've prepared themselves for wanting to do it. But, you know, it's like a lot of things. You just continue to put it on the back burner. And just like you said, the toilet paper crisis, I like that analogy. It's not until something like this happens where you really realize the importance of it or doing it. I mean, it's just taking that step and just doing it.
Yeah. So, okay, well, I think you did a special report for us on investing in Teak, which people can get by sending an email to Teak, T-E-A-K, Teak at realestateguysradio.com. Free report. You know, if you're not familiar with Teak or investing in agriculture or investing offshore, it may seem really, really out there. But really, if you think about it, buying real estate, you know, anywhere is buying real estate. Buying farmland is just a form of buying real estate, and teak is just a type of a crop. And you could make an argument, I think a pretty good argument, that of all the different types of crops you could invest in, it's a pretty good one, right? Universal demand. You don't have to get the geography right, except for where it grows. It's got to be able to grow well, but huge demand because it's used in construction. Last time I looked globally, they're not making less people, they're making more. And anything that is involved in building shelter and places for those people to use, which is all real estate, is going to be a beneficiary. So it's not that far removed from being a real estate investor. And there's some good reasons from a diversification perspective, from a insulation from financial markets perspective, from a privacy perspective, and certainly now maybe perhaps from a secondary residency perspective, you might want to take a look at it. So Teak at realestateguysradio.com. Rachel, any final closing comments?
No, I mean, that's just about it. If anybody's interested in hearing more about the residency or ownership of Teak, as Russ mentioned, it is a real estate investment. It is fully titled. You own it. And just it's a nice thing to add to your portfolio to accomplish that diversification. We have very affordable options starting about 7,000 US. And there are payment schedules for folks who are looking to leverage a little bit. So just reach out to us. We're happy to talk to you about it and see if it's something that makes sense for you.
Okay. Thanks, Rachel.
Thank you, Russ. Bye-bye.